I've been learning guitar recently. It is going poorly. But I've been watching a lot of guitar on YouTube, and the other night this clip from a Netflix musical was served to me on autoplay while I was trying to learn G major.
I don't know much, but this much I do. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God.
So, naturally intrigued, I poured myself a drink and watched the entire film, and then spent a week writing an essay about it. So, pour yourself a drink and let's talk about A Week Away. Cheers. Two things before we really get started. This is a musical. There might be some jokes in here about singing, but we're going to try and respect the genre. So you're just going to have to accept that diegetic singing happens in this and it doesn't make any sense. The other thing is that if you're a Christian or have any faith and you find this challenging or offensive, that's totally fine. I'll defend your right to believe whatever you want as long as I'm allowed to talk about it here. Especially given that this film borderlines on propaganda. One of the things I want to be really clear about as we get started is that I'm not just going to trash talk this movie. That's part of why I made this video. I ended up researching a lot of reviews and criticism, and there's just not a lot because, I mean, films like this don't really get remarked upon, and anything that did exist was lazy and mean-spirited. Adrian's review from The Guardian in particular just seemed to think it was funny that people made religious films at all. We're not here to do that. We're here to actually analyze this as a text and try to understand just what the hell is going on. From the first frame, this film lifts inspiration from early 2000s High School Musical era Disney shows. It presents the same catchy Freaks and Geeks vibes of Spider-Man Homecoming, but from the jump, it's clear the filmmakers aren't really sure why that 90s tone worked or how to effectively deploy it. We have tone-setting credits that suggest travel and music, then we cut to our protagonist, Will Hawkins, running from the police. This contrast cut is a neat bit of filmmaking. The 90s pop music and the chase are contiguous, letting us know that this is not a serious police chase. We just came off those vibes, so there's not going to be too much violence here. This is a Disney-fied version of reality. He's running from the cops, carrying his guitar and duffel. Already we can glean a few things about Will. He's in trouble with the law, but refuses to ditch his guitar and belongings, so perhaps he's a member of the dehoused community, or potentially he's run away from home. It's unclear. Will gets caught by the friendly police, yep, sure, those exist, and taken to social services because he's an orphan. He stole a cop car, we learn, like an actual cop car, which is crazy, and he's in with his social services officer, Mark. Mark provides an ultimatum: go to summer camp with this other kid or go to juvie, which is one of the strangest conditional custody problems I've ever heard. All of the common law cases I could find around juvenile delinquency in the US appear that they don't really work like this in terms of sentencing. You don't really choose your outcome based on two options. Instead, you make a deal, and that usually includes a series of conditions like community service, or perhaps something like this where some kind of remediation of, hey, look, I'm trying to change. It doesn't tend that you can avoid incarceration by choosing option B. It's not like a fork in the road problem. So again, already, weird reality. We then meet George, the other kid, and his mum. His mum is the sweetest character of all time, and George looks like this and is wearing a Save Ferris TV shirt. Because we need to know he's a nerd, so he's into ska and 90s movies. If you don't know Save Ferris, you'll recognize this 10 Things I Hate About You scene.
I called in a favor!
This intro sets out some key details that tell us a lot about the world this story is trying to play in, and particularly, most importantly, the moral world of A Week Away. First, a few basic cliches. When confronting Will about stealing a police car, Mark is sure to repeat multiple times that Will is a good kid, he's talented, smart. If only he'd stop throwing his life away, if only he'd apply himself. Which is a good question, because is Will a kid? The statutory age of majority for not being considered a minor varies state to state in the US, but typically ranges between 16 and 17. So let's generously assume Will is a minor. I then did some maths to just try and understand the diegesis of this well. In 2019, according to the US Department of Justice, 721,885 incidents of grand theft auto occurred or were at least reported. According to Maryville University's collated stats on juvenile delinquency, auto theft made up less than 6% of all offenses most commonly handled by juvenile courts. So let's just be generous to the film, let's assume that it's 5%. The way that those Maryville stats work is that it's 5% of every 100,000 juveniles in America. That's why I made it 5%. It's just a nice even number. According to the US Census Bureau, there are approximately 41 million, nearly 42 million youth aged between 10 to 19 in the US, which is about 13% of the total population. So with some quick maths, that means that there were approximately 2 million-ish minors who committed grand theft auto per year in the US, and this one kid is getting a special offer that is conditional and works different to every other version of the system. Editing David here. Just wanted to jump in and clarify. I missed a calculation there. I needed to find another 5% of that total, which brings us down to that 6% that we rounded down to 5%, which means that we're talking about 100,000 juvenile grand theft auto cases per annum. And I guess what that kind of boils down to when it comes to the diegesis of this film is that it'd like us to believe that 100,000, this one kid is treated differently. That's all. Back to the video. This isn't a criticism or to be CinemaSins exactly, but I'm trying to illustrate a point. This story is not concerned with reality in any sense. Here, crimes are about feeling isolated and left out. They are individual actions of somebody feeling left out of a system. The story is deeply concerned with representing problems, whether they be acting out via criminal activity or addiction or poverty, as individual problems where one must work on themselves in order to better fit in with the existing structures. Unlike its obvious tonal inspirations, like 10 Things I Hate About You or Freaks and Geeks, A Week Away doesn't seem to really understand why those stories in particular frame problems as individual ones. Why High School Musical features characters working on individual problems, not structural ones. And it's because in high school, most of your problems are individual, they're about you. And specifically in 10 Things I Hate About You, all of them are individual problems. Issues in most of these stories set in high schools are for the most part tremendously low stakes, but are taken very seriously by the characters. They are imbued with significance because of how important it is when you're a teenager as those things are happening. Not because they are, by their own merit, crucially important to the world writ large. Because as we've all experienced, the heightened melodrama of high school feels real when you're in it. And these post-90s rom-com kind of corny high school stories were there to remind us of just that exact fact. That it's okay to take silly things seriously, that's what being a kid is about. Here, A Week Away takes the aesthetic and framing whole cloth from this inspiration and lays it over a Caucasian teenager who stole a cop car, getting off the hook because he agrees to go to summer camp where he's going to be converted to becoming a Christian. And this is why the opening act is written this way, to be extremely explicit. The outcome, Christian conversion summer camp, is written in stone before the setup is constructed. Logic and plot and diegesis are manipulated to get Will to the summer camp where the things the filmmakers already believe should happen will be explored. Which, on that note, it's time for our first song. Which is immediately about how good the Bible is, and then becomes a diegetic traveling song. And this is where I was really confused, and will continue to be confused no matter how many times I watch this film. Because this story wants it both ways. It wants the musical numbers to start non-diegetically and then sometimes end diegetically. This lack of decision-making permeates every aspect of the narrative. Because film musicals, by definition, usually pick one or the other. Songs are either fully diegetic, which is to say actually literally happening in the world, characters are really for real singing, or the songs are representative of conversations and emotions. Tick, Tick, Boom, for example, is for the most part diegetic with a few exceptions, and then something like Les Mis is almost exclusively representative. They're not supposed to be actual songs in the world. So we get to summer camp, and the first thing that happens is Will sees an attractive girl, and he's hooked. He grabs her at the end of the song and dips her in a dance, because I guess that's how Christians flirt. This is one of our 4 major players. This is Avery. We then meet Sean and his gang, clearly our like Christian-friendly bullies from the summer camp who are competing with Avery, George, and Will at a talent competition, I think. More on that later. This is the closest the film can come to a bully, of course, because it's Christian summer camp. And here we see one of the film's key creative problems emerge. Sean is this kind of pasty, tall ginger kid who is kind of mean, but not in a way that is convincing or is actual bullying. And this is where the fiction and the overarching framework of Christianity and belief kind of rub up against the thing this story should be doing. The tension is never fully realized throughout the story or at any real point because hurdles are so easy to overcome because hurdles are usually other people that disagree with our heroes. And disagreeing has to be done in like a relatively godly fashion. No one can ever be properly mean or wrong. And so Sean is a really great example of that right out of the gate. He's a bully who isn't really a bully. And it means the story ends up lacking any real punch, but we'll get to that. So we meet Sean, and then we break into an a cappella song. At this point, I'm no longer sure what the film is, and I'm starting to lose my mind. They do a kind of remix of the traveling story our guys sang earlier, but it's supposed to be, it's confused. I think it's supposed to be like a sexy breakdance version to impress Avery, but it's the same song we just heard. And it's like, you guys could have written more songs for this. You could have written more, you could have written a different song. And again, then everyone breaks into the chorus of the previous song. And somehow, and I guess this means the music is diegetic, Will is with me. He's like, what the frick is going on? Also, Champ Kind is here, which means I have more questions. You know Champ Kind, the guy who was the asshole lawyer from the famous actor Champ Kind? I have so many questions. For plot and gender convenience, George and Will bunk together, and they set up the real stakes of our story. George is into a nerdy girl, and Will is chasing Avery. George correctly explains that Avery wouldn't be into a cop car stealing kid, which is a bold assumption from George from a girl that he barely knows. So if he wants to impress her, Will must actively participate in the camp. He's going to have to really give it a try. George agrees to protect Will's secret about being a criminal if Will will assist him in overcoming his social anxiety. So these are our 2 key points of tension for our protagonists. Will must conceal his true nature in order to get the girl while doing Christian things, and George has to, learn to talk to girls, I guess, which is fine. We get told shorts are a must for a gag, and then immediately cut to a girl not wearing shorts in the next frame. That's my last, actual nitpick here, but this is just representative of the effort that's gone into some parts of the filmmaking process here. And this one is entirely on Parker Adams, the editor. Just, watch your film one time before pressing render. That's all I'm saying. The next 20 minutes of the film is kind of nothing. Will and George play paintball with the girls. Some other stuff happens. We'll get to it in a minute. Crucially, at this juncture, George can barely talk to his crush, Presley. They are destructively awkward in a way that is only achievable by adults writing teenagers. I was an awkward teenager, and no one is like this. At this point, the songs start to get lazy and don't really recover till the last number, so I won't really play too much of them. It's just actors singing in autotune. This particular song is about believing in yourself. Avery and Will sing the same message to their other gendered counterpart. It's kind of like a clever framing device where they're both similar. Don't you see? It doesn't matter where you come from, I guess. The biggest mistake you can make is not backing yourself. That's the message right here. The sidekicks counter-argue that it's easy for Will and Avery. They're the pretty protagonists, after all. And our 2 very pretty people are unable to offer a counter-argument to that. They just instead say, believe in yourself. That'll fix it. And I'm not trying to dissuade that kind of rhetoric. Self-belief is important. Self-actualization is important. But the way that you get there is not by believing in yourself. What they're actually saying is that you never need to be better. Just turn to someone better and more wise for answers and just be better. Just fix yourself. Proximity to faith is enough. The literal geography of being at Christian summer camp is plenty. Just be happy. Don't critically engage with your issues. Just ignore them. Pretend they aren't there. Pray that trauma away. Believe in yourself. Once again, the individual problem of struggling to ask someone out or being socially anxious is abstracted to a structural one. If we all just believed in ourselves, we wouldn't be so insecure and we would fit in. Just be like everybody else. And then right at the end, they suggest, listen, if you don't believe me, well, God made you just the way you should be. This tension lies at the heart of most religious belief systems, but more so when it comes to Catholicism and Christianity. Crucially here, the outcome dictates how the evidence is wielded and constructed. Once you've decided that believing in yourself and trusting that everything is part of God's plan, which is the argument here, objections are easily manipulated to appear as supporting evidence. For example, George's comically dramatic social anxiety is a genuine challenge in his life that is dismissed out of hand by Will and the film. Imagine a similar mental health issue or regular medical malady like major depressive disorder or schizophrenia or a broken leg being waved away by just believe in yourself and pray. It's all part of God's plan. But that's sort of the point of this rhetoric. Because if you offered this counter-argument that, hey, maybe this isn't how we should be approaching this, the film would explain that they would obviously never trivialize important problems like that, and you're distorting the facts. You just don't get it. You're jealous. While making light of juvenile delinquency caused and encouraged by the ill-formed and miswielded foster care system in the US. We then kind of move into this tribunal thing, which is straight up cribbing Survivor. And it's a little sketchy on the racism side of things without really realizing that like those two things are different and that there is a meaningful distinction. Weirdly though, Tribunal is some solid world building. This is the last week of summer, we learn, so what Will doesn't know is that a lot of wheels are already in motion. There are already tribes formed. It's like Harry Potter teams, I guess. And the newbies are indoctrinated into this experience. The camp effortlessly snaps into place as an allegory for religious belief. You're kind of separated into teams, working on some friendly competition, but you got to buy in to be part of the club. You're joining a sacred and ongoing tradition. These teams have been around for ages. It's safe and good here, we promise. Also, this becomes a Braveheart reference later, and I don't know what to do with that. Another key factor in these modern propaganda-esque Christian films is this motivation to show that Christianity and modern Christians are cool and contemporary. You know, the Harry Potter reference is the Survivor stuff, right? Even though it feels like Tribunal is maybe worshipping a false idol, they kind of walk this fine line where things have to be Christian enough to satisfy radicals, but not so Christian as to put off any secular viewers who haven't yet self-selected out by this point in the film. Anything too salacious or too contemporary would put off the fundamentalists, while full-on sacraments or mass might scare off people that they're hoping to slowly convert, or at least enter into the top of the pyramid scheme that is Catholicism. The film then, for a while, becomes like Glee or Pitch Perfect. People just a cappella at each other. I actually really don't mind this. It's one of the better parts of the film. There is still a definite real sense throughout this whole scene and throughout the rest of the film that these songs were composed kind of in isolation to the people singing them. And it becomes kind of clear that like there is just nobody on this cast who can do certain things, or they're not allowed to. In a particular moment during this a cappella, there is obviously a rap bar dropped in, but none of the actors are confident enough to land on the beat, so it ends up as more talk singing, I guess.
Not rude, we're not mean, we're just money, honey, with a green machine. We're not rude, we're not mean.
And this is kind of a common issue with these propaganda films where they're kind of walking that thin line. You can't have someone actually rapping because the kinds of people who watch, fund, and produce these films spent the better part of the 90s claiming that rap is evil, but you want to feel cool and down with the kids and convince the teens that you know what's going on. So you end up with this. We then learn that the week's events leading up to the conclusion, I guess, or like the end of the camp, are called war games. This is where my own experiences with the church divert a little. This naming is not presented as a red flag. I guess because maybe because it's American Christianity. I don't know. Guns and God kind of go together. But the conflation at play is that goodness and godliness are the same. Because the name War Games, if you've seen the film, It kind of references and emulates a ton of things that the Bible explicitly disagrees with. But the movie is so interested in being referential that it doesn't really consider this to be an obstacle or a problem or a point of tension. In including references to things like Mr. and Mrs. Smith later, it undercuts the point of trying to appeal to a younger audience. It doesn't understand why these references are interesting or engaging, it just knows what they are. And so in the context of a film like this, where we're trying to sanitize and Disneyfy all of these contemporary references, referencing a modern film that depicts violence and sex as capitalist fantasy is a direct contradiction to everything, not just in the source material, the New Testament, but the way that the film discards it because the kids need to know we're cool rhetoric is very confusing. I think a second pass of this and just a quick script edit, you could change that name to be anything else and it would unaffect the plot writ large. And that's kind of my point, I think, is that a lot of these decisions are just careless. They're not made deliberately to be difficult or to be obtuse. They are just legitimately careless and thoughtless. Ramping up toward what is, relatively speaking, the climax of the story, the film makes a bold truth claim about Will's past behavior. George confronts him and he says, listen, you're being moody and upset about your circumstances and it looks really bad. Avery's not going to dig it. You need to get it together. Be here at camp with us, bro. The film is telling us that at some point Will need to surrender himself to the experience of camp and so too consequently surrender himself to the experience of God.
Right? I need you for the talent show. You're just what I need to bring the performance over the top and it's gonna be epic.
Please stop saying that.
Well, it's true. And I'll quit if you quit with all the, no, boo-hoo. I'd rather be anywhere in the world but this place because I'm so broody and cool. It's not a good look. Even I know that. Look, you have a chance to do something really solid this week. Help me win for the first time in my entire life. And bonus, hang with Avery. And who knows, maybe you'll even have a little bit of fun. Like, by accident.
But what George actually says, and pay attention to this because the framing of the film doesn't think this is what is happening, what George actually says is, bury your feelings and pray them away. This is the second time Will has been told this.
It's not a good look. Even I know that. Look, you have a chance to do something really solid this week. Help me win for the first time in my entire life. And bonus, hang with Avery. And who knows, maybe you'll even have a little bit of fun. Like, by accident.
Then Will is scared to jump from a great height into a lake. This is visual shorthand, or, okay, it's not even shorthand, it's a literal leap of faith, okay? He has to kind of take a leap of faith to religion and the camp, right? This is too on the nose to be accidental, but kind of demonstrates my point earlier about how thoughtless a lot of this film is. It doesn't take its medium seriously at all. It goes, how do we represent that he's willing, ready to take a leap of faith to religion? Have him just take a leap of faith in real life. Aside from how much the visual is gratingly obvious, the film continues to misunderstand the device of the musical further, which at this point is getting kind of impressive. Songs continue to begin diegetic and then dissolve into non-diegesis. Then sometimes they end in a way that agrees with pre-song continuity, in a way that suggests that some of these diegetic songs never happened. It is very confusing, and I'm unsure if this was a mistake in the editing bay, or the script, or the songwriting, but honestly, the grasp on reality becomes pretty thin. And I get it, the goal is to make religion a sanitized, kind of sexy teen experience, but the complete disregard for both the cinematic language, the narrative tools, and the medium of musical the story uses, it almost feels borderline intentional. This could have been a parody if 2 or 3 other things were changed. The effect this ends up having on the rest of the film is that reality becomes difficult to particularly identify. It's never certain that a song is being sung in the world or is supposed to be representational, so we're never quite sure where our characters are at, what they're thinking and feeling, and what they've actually communicated to each other. Because a key device in musicals is characters being able to communicate thoughts and emotions to each other that don't directly represent dialogue. So there are certain things communicated in songs in this musical that would change the relationship between Will and Avery, but we're never quite sure if we're supposed to think that was said out loud or if the characters are just feeling things and we're seeing the representation of that. We're approaching the turning point of the film, and this is partly why I wanted to make this video, because There's some good things in this film, but I don't think any of the critics really stuck around long enough to get to them. Okay, well, I say good. There are some not bad things that I'm gonna talk about some of those not bad things now. So we get two of the best qualities of the film here. We get Will's music and then his encounter with Avery. For about 5 minutes, the movie is just a good coming-of-age romance that has very little to do with God. Will is like a genuinely talented and charming singer who performs well. It helps. Our two unreasonably attractive protagonists have really good chemistry and behave like real middle-class teenagers might. The scene ends with Avery taking Will to an almost direct allegory for stepping into heaven / being accepted. It's this spot where her relative died, where she explains how faith functions to Will. It's really interesting. You should watch this whole scene if you get an opportunity. It's fascinating to watch the filmmakers speaking directly through their character. She loses almost all voice and agency, and it is just a script telling us how belief works.
Well, yeah. Of course, I miss her every day, but I know that it's just temporary.
So you'll see her again.
100%.
100%. Wow.
I mean, I guess I don't know that, but yeah, no, I just choose to believe. I mean, that's faith, right?
Essentially, Avery tends to the garden around this place, pruning the faith and preparing the soil. It's about rituals and stillness. So then she sings a song about how she needs God to help her find her place in the world. Bizarrely, the film pays attention to this scene and actually puts in some effort into the cinematic language, specifically the lighting. The song grows from cool blues and ambers and oranges as Will physically grows closer and emotionally closer to Avery. And of course, by extension, to God, because the garden is an extension of her faith. Despite the way that this synthesizes the heavy-handed allegory, we get a glimpse of some genuine charm here. We then go into a paintball match that is overlaid with a very upbeat song about how my father's house is big, like God's house, because they're outside in nature and God made nature. You get it. It's house, God's house, heaven. You get it. This is intercut with, I guess, the rest of the war games. So there's a tug of war, there's some American football competitions, a pie eating contest, which, is that not gluttony? And then we just see the rest of the war games. What's interesting is we then get a Mr. and Mrs. Smith slow-mo paintball fight featuring Will and Avery. And unfortunately, I have to be honest, it's not that bad. It's not good. It's not as bad as anything in Community, but it's not terrible. And this is what really bothers me about this film and why it's been stuck in my brain. When the filmmakers decide to pay attention and put thought into what they're doing, they can execute really well put together scenes. Speaking of, we then pivot to a genuine camp bonfire where everybody talks about how God good is. I've written in my script how God good is. That sentence should be talks about how good God is. That's very funny. Avery sings and Will contributes and everyone cries. It's a lot. The song is one of the more technically well-composed tunes of the show. I played it for a friend of mine who's super into musicals, and she supported this too. She thought it was a decent tune. And this is the movie's anthem and where a lot of the attention went when it comes to the marketing.
Wide awake while the world is sound asleep. Too afraid of what might show up while you're dreaming. Nobody sees you. Nobody will believe you.
Every day you try to pick up all the pieces, all the memories, they somehow never leave you. Nobody sees you. Nobody will believe you.
God only knows what you've been through.
God only knows what they say about you.
God only knows how it's killing you.
Which I think means now is a good time to talk about the movie's conclusions on its themes and why this song was centered so much in the marketing. Avery has experienced significant personal loss, and so she has found God, because only God knows, as the song states. Will has had a really hard life as an orphan, and the system has mistreated him, and he's done some bad stuff, but he finds God because only God knows. This clip is on YouTube, and it's pretty much only watched by the kinds of people who support these films. And the comment section is a really clear indication of the takeaway message for this film.
As a Christian family, Let's pray together that we may see more of these type of people around our world.
If you declare with your mouth, Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. Romans 10:9.
I didn't even know it was a Christian movie until I turned it on. I'm proud to be a Christian. It changed my life and saved my life.
We then get a direct explanation from Will, almost literally to camera. He and Avery have a moment alone, and he says, "It's been so long since I felt so connected." And this is the real beauty of the way that these kinds of films and propaganda fictionalize reality. Because only God knows is an impossible claim to prove or disprove. It exists to provide emotional support for a predetermined outcome. God is good, and how do you know that? Because only God knows. And how does God know? Well, because God is good. This is a logical fallacy known as begging the question, where the premise of the claim is required to accept the claim to be true. In a real sense, it's circular logic. Which is funny because one of the original circular logics comes from the Bible, which is that God is real because the Bible says so, and the Bible is from God. Therefore, the central conclusion of the film is presented in a way that is undefeatable because it is not logical. You cannot defeat this rhetoric with logic. The rhetoric of the film is clarified and crystallized in this moment. The outcome was predetermined all along, and the plot was then reverse engineered, sprinkled with surface level emotionality to make the journey feel more important. You then add in props, as in other characters like Avery, to provide a carrot on the stick for our protagonist to pursue, when in reality what he's really pursuing is the thing we knew he was going to do all along, which is accepting God into his heart. It's callous, disrespectful, and a little patronizing. Put simply, Will must accept that God knows all and will forgive you, and by extension Avery, because she believes in God and God knows all. Then, because the film realized it didn't have tension for its climax, Will is provided an ultimatum. The non-bully, Sean, knows Will is a delinquent and threatens to tell Avery. Feeling he'll be rejected, Will packs up all of his stuff and prepares to flee. Sean tells Avery anyway, and also everybody else. Avery goes to the camp runner and explains she needs to go to Will, knowing he'll listen to her. Again, in moments where it pays attention to what it's doing, the film is able to employ narrative convention quite well. If you take out the God stuff and heavy-handed allegory, this is just a regular coming-of-age romance. I suppose with the slight asterisk that in a regular film, Avery wouldn't be allowed to leave, and this would be meaningful conflict to overcome. When Avery catches up, Will correctly addresses and argues about Avery's privilege in a framing that the film thinks is like petulant and teenager-ish, but is, you know, accurate.
Because you are so loved.
By who? God?
Yes.
Then where was he? Where was he? He didn't take me that night. No, he left me there. He wasn't there for me that night. He hasn't been there for me since. I mean, what kind of a God is that? Tell me. But you know what? It's fine. I'm fine. Okay?
The film seems to actually understand how privileged people who show religion don't have the capacity to properly comprehend suffering and grief, because they filter reality through this constructed framework that supports the things they already believe. They can't make genuine emotional connections about suffering and difficulties because they don't really genuinely engage with them as concepts. They're just props or mechanisms for an existing predetermined set of beliefs. So what we end up with in the most general abstract sense at the conclusion of this film is a Caucasian boy who struggled through the foster system and barely escaped delinquency, explaining how it's unfair he is suffering under the toe of the universe, to an upper-class Christian teen girl at summer camp. In another twist that defies all belief, Will then correctly identifies the religious issue of begging the question we discussed earlier. If God is great and infallible because the book he wrote is never wrong and not be questioned, then why do bad things happen all the time?
What kind of a God is that?
Why do they contradict what the book promises? Where was God when everything was going wrong for me? You know, the logical argument we talked about before that definitely doesn't work in the framework of these belief systems. The film here employs and includes this deliberately to defeat that potential opposition. That opposition becomes support of the framework. This rhetoric is everything that these systems do. It is so one-to-one and obvious about it, it's almost kind of cool. Avery gives Will the Polaroid of them together at camp, and Will decides to leave anyway. This doesn't make a lot of sense. Don't think about it too much. Avery tells him to get screwed, basically, but once she's calmed down, Will decides to head back to camp, apropos of nothing. I guess at some point in walking in the dark, he remembered, oh yeah, I don't want to go to juvie. But nothing about the way the scene resolves or is shot or the dialogue suggests that Will was convinced by Avery's argument or even his own rhetoric. He goes back just because. This goes unremarked upon in the film. The central turning point for our protagonist, his decision to go back, is left almost entirely unaddressed. And I was trying to work out why when I was writing this script, and I honestly have no idea. I think genuinely the screenwriters forgot that's how stories work. That if a character decides to change their life in a pretty significant way, you probably should include people talking about that at some point. But no, Will returns at the peak of the talent show just as the team needs him the most. Will kisses the girl and then gets on stage. He and George perform a refrain from the opening camp song, and there is a genuine sheen and charm to this. It is a little too much contemporary pop in a way that kind of undoes itself. It doesn't feel like this could have actually happened at a Christian camp, but it is good, safe rock, which is not by itself a problem exactly. My issue here more is that this song is played in direct response to Will's rhetoric before, where he was right, and the song seems like it's directly trying to defeat that argument with shallow emotionality. For example, the chorus includes this phrase, quote, "This is the best thing ever." So, that's fun, I guess. Will and Co. do a good song and win talent thing and wargame, and camp is over, I think. Sean apologizes for being a dick and faces no social or actual consequences for his ungodly actions, from what we can see. Maybe he'll be damned later by the all-powerful. So let's give the film its proper credit and see what it was trying to achieve. So to recap, Will starts as a delinquent in the old world, and the threat facing him is juvenile detention. He crosses the threshold to camp and resists the call initially. Along his journey, he sorts allies from foe and takes on the mentorship of George as the wizard character. In order to overcome his challenge and return to the old world with his newfound gift, Will must learn the key lesson from those around him. Believe in God. Just because. He doesn't believe, yells at the girl he likes, decides to believe, and then sings a good song. That is technically almost a plot. The film ultimately ends with George's mum adopting Will. It's a really authentic scene, and George's mum is just acting the hell out of it. I'm not even sure if she's acting or if she's just that nice. Either way, it's great. We experience our final refrain of our key tunes, and it really works as a musical finale. I'm here for this all day. It's really great. So why exactly did I spend so long talking about and giving this Christian musical the time of day and my attention? Like I said before, reading a lot of the critical reviews for this it's a little embarrassing. It's very much critics sneering at the propaganda or failing to even engage at all, or fundamentalists yelling its praise from the rooftop. It's mostly that last thing. But it's important that we continue to critically engage and discuss texts like this. Specifically, texts designed to desensitize people to rhetoric that warps reality to achieve a predetermined conclusion. When there's a plan to everything and the complexity of reality is able to be filed down toward one simple truth and narrative, it can be easy to be tricked, convinced by these charlatans, these religious people, these cultists. A useful question to start with in these contexts is, what do the creators stand to gain from the conclusion of the story? What are they trying to achieve? What is it that they want me to walk away with? How might one group benefit from convincing you that their beliefs are true, and that if you subtly change your view of reality, you'll get it. You'll finally feel included. You'll be part of something. That yearning within you will be completed. Things will finally make sense. It's the best thing ever. We promise.